Hello, and welcome to my class on feast planning and logistics. I am a, a member of many different medieval groups, and for SEA, I am Honorable Lady Serena Calandra from Adlersruhe and Kingdom of Onstiora. And for Amtgard, I am Contessa Dame Calandra Dracovolf of the Duchy of Ravenscross and the Kingdom of the Golden Plains. And I have been cooking for large groups for over 20 years, actually more like getting close to 30 at this point. I started with cooking with large groups working at summer camps and cooking for 15 to 50 people over fires. So, but that helped give me knowledge for learning about portions and things that you have to account for and things like that. And knowing that cooking for 50 people over fire is not something you usually want to do. But if you are interested in learning more about that, please contact me later and we can go over it because that's a whole nother beast in itself, but sometimes works for some events. But I'm going to go over some different things that I've learned over the years for feast planning. I've cooked a lot of feasts at many different levels for many different organizations. And I'm going to bring up the screen share and show the document that I'm looking at that I've also shared in the chat of some general things to look out for. Bring that up. Okay. So I'm just going to take a moment to get it to where it'll let me select the right tab. Okay. So when you're looking at planning a feast, there are many things that you want to take in consideration. The first thing that I look into is the site. Depending on what group that you're working with, sometimes you're going to be the one that's in charge of the site. For SA and others, usually you are not the one in charge of the site, but there are questions that you want to ask. Like, how far away is the site from where you are? Is there a kitchen? There are many times that I have been in charge of a feast that there is no kitchen on site, and so you have to account for that. So if there is a kitchen, need to also see what size the oven is, and is there a stovetop? These are not givens. Not all locations are going to have all of that functioning. There was one site that I used that the oven was one very small oven that a regular full-size cookie sheet would not fit in. Also, there were no racks in the oven. This was something that we did not know ahead of time, which goes to one of my other things of always be prepared, but we'll go more into that later for options. But it's helpful to know. Some sites you may be lucky and you have a full commercial kitchen and multiple ovens to use. And others, all that you have is you have electricity. And sometimes you don't even have that. So it's helpful to ask all these questions ahead of time. It's also good to know how many burners the stovetop has. So when you're planning what your menu is, you can take these things into consideration of what you have out there to be able to use. Also need to know what type of appliances may be allowed to be brought in, such as griddles, roaster ovens, electric skillets, crock pots, hot plates. Some places will have in the rental agreements that you cannot bring in a hot plate or an electric skillet, but you may be able to use a crock pot. But you can't use anything that has an exposed heating element, or you may not be able to use any sterno cans and things like that. So these are things that you want to know and question ahead of time. You also want to be aware of what equipment is available on site. Some churches, while yes, they may have pots and pans and all that stuff there, they may not allow outside groups to use it, or there may only be specific things that you're allowed to use. And so these things that are helpful to know so you can be aware of what you need to bring yourself. If you're doing something out at a park and you're wanting to grill, you need to find out, are there grills available to use? And do they use charcoal or gas? Do you need to bring your own things for that? Or whether you're allowed to bring your own grill on site to grill things for certain events. Some campgrounds don't allow those. So you want to make sure you're aware of that. Same with Fires. If you're trying to cook a feast over fire, you need to find out if fire is allowed. Generally, if you're in Texas, the answer is usually going to be no, because we're usually having a burn ban, which is why I haven't cooked over fire in a very long time. But in the Midwest, you have more opportunities that you might be able to do a feast over fire. So you want to be aware of what all the specific guidelines are. I often like to, if I can, be able to read the rental agreements. Oftentimes, many sites will actually have some stipulations, will have them on their websites that you can look at to find out what may or may not be allowed. It is very common that open flame in particular is not allowed at all, which does apply to sterno cans for doing warm, for keeping things warm. So you want to find other options besides that. Is there running water in the cooking area? There is a site that we use in West Texas that there is no kitchen, there is no running water except for in the bathroom. It is not potable water. And their kitchen that they have is a covered area that has little areas set up that you could put bins in for doing your washing, and there's a pump, and there's a table to set up a propane grill on, or propane stove. That's their camp kitchen that they call it. So it's helpful to know these things because you may not always have water, and the bathroom is a fair distance away from it. So you have to lug water in between those places. And same with trying to figure out what fridge and freezer space is available. Some sites, even though you may do a walkthrough and they have a fridge, that doesn't mean you're allowed to use it. And so, once again, ask questions. Always ask the questions. Do not assume anything with the sites. I like to be aware of all of these items before I start coming up with a menu. I also want to know what my budget is before I come up with a menu, because that all will affect my menu depending on how much I have. With some groups that I've cooked for, oftentimes they're only giving us a budget of $100 to feed 50 to 100 people, which I will tell you right now is not very reasonable. 20 years ago, it was much more reasonable than it is right now. Other ones, feasts that I'm doing soon, I have a budget of $10 per person. That's a really nice budget. It makes a difference on what I can do. Also, it helps to know whether buying anything like paper goods, the plates, bowls, cups, things like that, whether that's part of the feast budget or that's separate. Oftentimes with SCA, people bring their own feast gear, but sometimes for a sideboard lunch, you are providing paper stuff. So these are things that you want to know. And bargain shopping is an important part with keeping the budget. So some things that I like to do that helps me is I will set up a mock shopping list, generally with Walmart, because that's where my base pricing for a lot of things comes from. And so I will go in, you can create a list and name it, and go in and put everything that I want on there for the feast, what I think, and then it gives me the total, so I get an idea of the budget. But that doesn't mean that's what I'm going to spend, because I watch the other grocery chains that I have that have sales, because Walmart doesn't usually have a lot of sales. And so I have another grocery chain that I have a rewards membership with. So every week I get a coupon from them that gives me between $10 to $20 off of a $50 to $100 purchase. It varies each week which one it is. And I watch those, and they also frequently have buy one, get one free meat sales and vegetable sales and things like that. And so I watch that. And by looking at things in advance, I can often save a lot of money by utilizing those sales. So it's a good idea to look at all the different grocery stores around, even ones that you don't use, and see what's out there and join a rewards program, because that'll give you some good deals that will help you with saving money. Same with watching coupon apps and things like that. Which goes with one of my big things is planning ahead. Is once you have the idea of what your site is and what your budget, and you start looking at your menu planning, if you plan far enough in advance, then it makes it easier to save money. And that's where it's also helpful if you have an extra freezer. If you don't, find somebody that is trustworthy, that you know is not going to eat the food or anything like that, that is willing to store some food in advance. And that will help, because there's a lot of things you can buy ahead that you can freeze, like cheese that freezes, meats you can, and so that way you can watch sales. I often like to plan my menu at least 2 months in advance. That gives a good time frame to be able to plan ahead and watch those sales. I really like more time if I can, but that's not always reasonable depending on what's going on with the group. Another thing that is helpful, you may not be able to factor this in before you plan your menu, depending on what type of group you're planning this for, is dietary concerns. Now, if you're cooking for your local group, oftentimes you're well aware of some of the common allergens, and that helps give you an idea of things. But if this is your first time cooking for a group and you may not have any idea what allergens you have to prepare for, and so you may not be able to plan your menu around that. Now, the event that I'm planning the feast for in June, I was aware of a lot of the common allergies. Pork and gluten were two very common ones for this group. And so I put together my proposed menu based off of that, and excluding pork and having very little gluten on there, because I was aware of in advance. But it's something to keep in mind, though, after you do make your menu and you find out you have several people with a lot of allergies, you have to look at what could you adjust. Now, one thing I will say is a lot of people with allergies, and I'm one of them, oftentimes we will bring our own food anyways. And please do not get upset with anybody that does that. Even if you try to make accommodations, some of us are so complex in our issues that we don't want to chance it. I very rarely eat a feast that I didn't make, because there's too many factors that go into, other than I might have a piece of cheese or something. And I know a lot of people that are like that, but there are some that it's reasonable that you can make some accommodations for and be able to work that out. And it's good to try to do that as much as you can. Unfortunately, you won't always be able to accommodate for every allergy. Sometimes it is very difficult. Specifically, sometimes if people are allergic to things like black pepper, sometimes you can make a small section of something and set it aside before you add pepper or garlic or onions, which are common allergies that you will come across. Sometimes, though, it's just very difficult to work around. Some common allergies that you do want to keep in mind are seafood, nuts, mushrooms, gluten, cinnamon, and pepper. And those are ones in particular that can be an issue with being airborne. I do know there's some groups, specifically in the Midwest, that do not allow mushrooms at all, because a person that is at a lot of their events had an anaphylactic reaction just being near it being cooked. And that I know people with nut allergies that's happened to, and seafood. And then with cinnamon and pepper and gluten, if say you were baking bread on site, there's a chance that some of that flour is going to get in the air and might settle on something that you didn't think it would settle on, and may not be aware that it did. Same with cinnamon and pepper. And so just watch things like that. That's why anything that involves baking, I prefer to not do it on site. Any breads or cookies or cakes I would like to have baked ahead of time, because that lessens the chance of cross-contamination. It's also good to have, if they're being prepared by somebody, to have them being prepared in a different place from somebody that's preparing non-gluten items, so that you lessen your cross-contamination, which is something that you have to consider as well. And with that in mind, if you are using anything that has come in contact with gluten before to prepare gluten-free items, you do want to include that as a disclaimer, that things are prepared in prepared on equipment that has been used for gluten in the past. For some people, that is an issue. For some people, it isn't. And it's not realistic that you can generally afford to have duplicates of everything. And so it's just something to be aware of. Most people will ask about it, some won't. And so it's just good to be aware of all of that. Same with considering allergies, because this is a big one, is making sure that you have a list of all of your ingredients. And that includes if you are using a box or can item that has many other ingredients in it, you want to have those available too. Something that I often do is I will take a picture of all the labels, and then you can take all those labels and put them in a file and have that accessible so people can see that, or that the Feastocrat can pull up to show this is what we're using. Or, and I know that can be hard to type everything out when you're putting the ingredients list online. So you can put on the, put all the ingredients on there, and then if you're using a box or canned item, put the name brand of it, and then say full list of ingredients available if you contact the Feastocrat, something like that, so that they can reach out about that if you're, have something that has 20 different ingredients in the processed item. The reason why I say to include the name brand is a lot of people with allergies are aware of certain brands that they know this brand is safe, but this brand isn't. So that helps them sometimes with being able to look at. Also, they can often search online for that item and be able to look up that item and see if it has any of their allergens in it. So just a way to help keep track of all of that. This is, when you're doing feasts like this, you definitely do not want to do anything that has secret ingredients, because that often can lead to tragedy. And you also don't want people to say, oh, it doesn't have this in it, and it does. And this can be a life-threatening issue. And so you just want to be very careful and cautious with that. You want to make sure that you have, if you do put everything in a file, you want to make sure you have access to that. So it's good to print it off and have a paper copy at the event in case you don't have internet, because sometimes we don't. And so you want to make sure that you have that there. It's also good to be able to put your ingredients list out ahead of time so that people can make judgments. And then also, if you need to make some minor alterations, you might be able to. And so that, sometimes it's possible to, have a little blander version of something before you add the seasoning, and then just have a small portion of that if people let you know ahead of time. And that's where we get into the menus. So at this point, you've looked at your site, you're aware of what you have access for cooking, you've got an idea about what your budget is, and start trying to think about more specifically what you want to do with your menu. There are some certain rules that I follow with menus. One of them is to have a variety of different foods. I've been to some feasts where the entire feast was, it was potato soup and bread. That was the whole feast, nothing else, no dessert, nothing. And if you were allergic to that, okay, there's nothing else. And it also is not very filling. I try to have a variety of different items. I usually like to have, I want to have at least 2 proteins. I want to have one that is a meat protein and one that is preferably a vegan protein. If you do have more than 2 proteins and have a vegan and vegetarian, then that works too. I used to lean more towards doing vegetarian, having cheese and stuff, but there's a lot more, even if you don't have vegans in your area, there are a lot of people with dairy allergies. And so often if you do a vegan and not using vegan lab created milk, so oftentimes you're doing vegan, it's going to help people with dairy allergies as well. And so that's a pretty common thing. I've seen a lot of times where people, their vegetarian dish doesn't have any protein in it, it's just vegetables. And that doesn't help a whole lot. You want to make sure that you have a protein for everybody, that they, or as many as you can for your proteins. I like to include a soup or a salad or both, depending on things. And salad doesn't necessarily mean a lettuce salad, it could be a pasta salad. And soups are a good way to incorporate a vegetarian and or vegan protein option into it, with lentils and legumes, beans of some sort, often work well in soups and give a protein in there. And there's even cold soup options for the summer. And salads often work better in the summer as well. And salad allows you to play around with different things to be able to include as well. And for a vegetarian protein, I do often realize I rely on garbanzo beans a lot, beans in general. That often works for a lot of people with things. Hummus, even if the protein is not part of one of your main dishes, but you have the protein somewhere in the menu, it still helps with things like hummus and vegetables. That's a common thing that I may have out there. Hummus is a protein, but you still want to try to accommodate as much as you can with things. Now, I like to have a couple side dishes, at least two. If you do soup and salad, then one other side dish is usually fine. But if you're just doing one or the other, then you want to have 2 to 3 sides. It helps also, people accommodating for different things, that maybe their entire meal is going to be those side dishes, just to have some variety. I like to have a bread of some sort and a dessert. Now, gluten-free is becoming a more common thing that you want to accommodate for. Gluten-free breads can be expensive sometimes, so it is helpful to get it. You may have to do a thing that if you need the gluten-free bread option, to let us know ahead of time so that you can try to accommodate specifically for that. Gluten-free crackers, though, works too. That's often a little bit of a cheaper option to put in there, depending on what it is and how it fits in with your feasts that you're doing. Feasts that I'm doing soon, pita is going to be a bread that we're using. And so I will have a limited amount of gluten-free pitas available, and then having the regular pitas also. Of course, definitely keep those separate. And so having an appetizer sometimes is helpful too, especially as you're trying to get out. Even if you're doing a buffet feast, having something, if you have something that maybe you can put out on the tables, like some grapes and cheese and things like that, that helps, to keep people appeased as you're trying to get things done. Have a little bit something out there. But really important, though, to make sure to provide a variety of foods and not just, soup and bread as your entire meal, to have a little bit of variety to help with everything. And with that, so then some other things that you're going to want to take into consideration is serving. How are you going to serve the food? So there are many different ways of how you can do that. And so you need to take into consideration, is it going to be served in multiple removes, multiple courses, or is it going to be a buffet style? Are you going to do it family style, where you're able to have all of the dishes on each table and then people can serve themselves at the table? I was able to do that for an event once, with multiple removes. We did the first remove of people came up to get their cheese and bread, but the main one, we were able to serve family style to the whole tables. Now, that does involve some coordination, that you have to have a head server that's in charge of things, and you need to get servers to be able to listen to them, because we did have an issue where somebody brought an extra plate of chicken to one of the tables, so one table didn't get their plate of chicken. And so you have to make sure to have that good communication on how they're going to do that, and have people that are going to listen. That is very important with all of this. Sometimes, though, buffet is your best way of doing things. The last feast that I did, we put out the platters of cheese and hummus and all the dips and the vegetables on the tables. And then we had people come up for a buffet to get the soups and the crackers. We specifically did not put the crackers out with the cheese, because we were trying to accommodate with trying to lessen gluten contamination as much as possible. So we made sure to put the crackers that had gluten and the bread on a table separate from everything else, because we had made it to where our main dishes, the soups, had no gluten in them. And so we were trying to keep things as separate as possible on that. And so we felt that putting it on the tables would increase chances of cross contamination on that. So then you want to think about with your serving also is how many servers do you need? Because that's also factoring in how many tables are you looking at, with how many people are you trying to do, which is something that we approached on here earlier. And very important, make sure you have enough serving utensils for everything, and make sure that everything has its serving utensil in it before you put it out. I had a feast that I had made a mistake, and we forgot to put the serving utensil in the gluten-free protein option of the chicken, and I had also wasn't thinking and put it right next to a one containing gluten, and so they ended up using the serving utensil in it, and so that left that we no longer had a gluten-free option for the meat for the rest of that. I have since learned from that to make sure to separate those things out from each other so that things like that don't happen. And that's why it's also good with buffets to not let people serve themselves sometimes, is to make sure you have servers serving things so that you lessen the cross contamination, because that is a very big issue that you need to watch out for. And also with lining up your servers, it's good to try to recruit them beforehand. If something happens and somebody doesn't show up, it's good to look early in the day, make sure that everybody's there. If somebody isn't there, then you want to recruit somebody many hours before feast so that you have everybody, and also get them to be there at least half an hour before you need to serve, so that any last minute things can be accounted for. They may be able to help with running things out to somewhere, setting up buffet tables, things like that, not just the actual serving of stuff, so that you're ready to go and on time if possible. I know that seems a little odd, but as I was saying earlier, if I'm running a feast, it will be on time. It does happen. And so you just want to make sure to account for everything that you can, because we want to keep food safety in mind. So this comes to my general tips. So you want to make a plan for how much each item needs to cook, how long it will take, what device it's going to be cooked on. I make a document. Some people will do spreadsheets. I personally have issues reading spreadsheets, because once I get past a certain point and I can't see what the name of the column I'm reading is for, I don't remember what it is. So mine are done in Google Documents in a format that makes sense to me. So use whatever format makes the most sense for you. For I know a lot of people, it is a spreadsheet. And I will put down things like who is bringing what item is. I put out what needs to be cooked on what device. And it's good to have that plan and also have it in a document. So if something happens that you end up not being able to be there at the last minute, you have somebody else that might be able to take over, and they have your plan of what needs to happen. And so with my last feast, I knew that we had one soup. We were doing 3 soups, and 1 soup was supposed to be cooked in roaster oven, 1 in a crock pot, and 1 in a pot on the stove, and be able to allow that and allocate, okay, what needs to go in an oven? How many things need to go in an oven? What temperatures do they need to be at? Can they be in there at the same time? These are all things that you need to consider when you're planning your menu too, because if you have 3 different things that need to go in an oven and you have 1 oven and they cook at different temperatures, you may have a problem, because also how are you going to keep these things warm? This is where I like roaster ovens, and I am actually going to stop the screen share a moment, because I always get asked this question: what is a roaster oven? Because many people don't know what that is. So this is where we have show and tell here. This is an electric roaster oven. Most of them you'll see are white. I just happen to have a red one. And this one is an 18 quart. There are some that are a little bit bigger, about 22 quart, some that are smaller. And it kind of works like a giant crock pot, but also works as a secondary oven because you can actually put a pan in there on a rack and you can bake a cake or bake bread in it too. So it gives you a secondary oven. A lot of people use it for putting large pieces of meat. It's really good if, say, you have multiple hams or multiple cuts of beef or something that you need to cook at once. It'll hold a lot of that. It's also good for large soups. I've done cottage pie, a feast with cottage pie that I did 2 big pans of that with 2 roaster ovens. So and we did it for soups, many things. They're also good for a potato bar. I've cooked 50, I think it was about 50 baked potatoes at once in a roaster oven for a baked potato bar feast. And so they're very useful. They usually use about the same amount of energy as a crock pot. And they have a dial that you can set up usually to about 450 degrees. And so they're very useful. The best time of year to buy them is going to be around Thanksgiving. That's often when they go on sale. Go back to document. I'm going to go ahead and actually, before we do that, I'm going to share that in the chat again for the people that just came in. And this is really just an outline of things to look out for and what to do. And it's good to make sure that your assistants are aware of what the plan is, what needs to be used for what. Going along with that, I do also like to make sure to bring an extra surge protector or power strip. There we go. Sometimes power strips that don't have surge protectors. That's also something that you do want to check with the guidelines for where you're renting. Some will not allow surge protectors at all. Some will allow non-surge protector power strips, but no extension cords. So these are things that you want to take in consideration as well. But it's helpful to be able to have that. For my last piece, we were trying to keep one of the soups warm with an electric warmer. So we needed to make sure that we could have an outlet close to that. And so the power strip helped with being able to have that plugged in nearby, as well as keep the roaster oven plugged in while we were serving. Food safety, that is a very important thing to keep in mind. In my kitchen, I enforce gloves. If you are handling food, you will be wearing gloves. Also, you will have your head covered. Your hair will be covered. That is non-negotiable for me. And I always make sure I do supply the gloves and have all that available. I choose latex free because latex is too common of an allergy that some people, even being remotely near a latex glove, is a problem. So latex free, food safe gloves. And with that, I always make sure that I bring hand soap and dish soap and paper towels, because you never know if the site is actually going to have that or they're going to run out. So I want to make sure I have that. I bring my own cleaning wipes as well, and cleaning supplies so that everything can be wiped down before you start. Disinfect everything that you can. Anything that's brand new, make sure it's getting washed. And so want to have all of that, make sure that you have all of those supplies and keeping that in mind. Also with food safety is being aware of what are the safe temperatures that things can be kept at. You do need to monitor that and be aware of it. If you don't know that, I highly recommend taking a food safety course, looking up things, double checking everything. It's good to periodically check your devices and make sure that they're still working and that things are being kept at a safe temperature. At my last feast, one of the crock pots was having an issue. It was supposed to be set on high. It looked like it was, but it wasn't actually on high. It was just slight of it. So it was cooking on low. When I checked on it after an hour and a half and realized that it was still very cold, we were able to transfer it to another pot and get it on the stove and get things to where they needed to be. So you want to keep checking things like that. Now, that goes to the whole thing of how are you going to keep things warm or cold as you get things prepared. You want to look at that. That is a very important thing. Sometimes you will have things that are going to be done before other things. Some things are safe that you can keep warm in an oven at a certain temperature for a while, which always look that up. The internet, you can find pretty much the safe way to keep about everything. Sometimes you need to use other devices. The roaster oven that I showed, that is actually a good thing for keeping things warm sometimes. If you're needing your oven for other things, you could use the roaster oven to hold things. Same with crock pots. We usually hold things for quite a while. They often have a keep warm setting that you can account for that. Keeping things cold. Now, this is where I have found something that will help a lot with keeping things cold. And let's see if I can get to the picture of it. Okay. I'm not able to get to the moment, but when we stop the recording, I will try to bring that up with that. Okay, so there's these things called inflatable buffets, or maybe also listed as an inflatable salad bar. You can buy them on Amazon, usually in multi-packs. They look like little swimming pools that you can put on a table. And they often will come with a pump, and you set it out, and it's good for keeping things cold. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share a moment and show something else that tends to go well with that. I like these things these are dry ice packs. This is one brand. There are many different brands. They come in sheets. You can usually set them apart. This one's not completely dried out yet. It still needs to go back to being dry, but they come with little powder crystals essentially in them, and you soak them in water for just a few minutes, and then you can put them in the freezer. And a lot of them will keep things cold for a couple days, sometimes depending on other factors as well, the outside temperature and such. And with the inflatable buffets, because these things are relatively flat when they freeze versus some of the gel packs, you can lay them down in the buffet and then put your cold things on top of it. Now, something for, say, SCA, and you're not wanting to have this, highly plastic thing looking out, you could cover it with a tablecloth and still be able to keep your cold things out in a safe thing. My last piece, we did a lot of compound butters and hummus and ranch that were going to the tables. Before we put them out on the tables, we had them sitting in the buffet to keep cold. Well, we were trying to, because we didn't have all the fridge space for all of the like 50 different little plastic containers that we had. So it was a good way to corral that. It's also good for salad bars or desserts or drinks and things like that. And the ones that I get usually fit on a 4-foot table fairly reasonably. And so it's just something that I found that's helpful with that. Same with, sometimes just putting an ice pack under something works depending on what you have access to. And also coolers. I am a big fan of cooler bags. Well, actually, some of them work really well for transporting things, because that's another thing you want to figure out is how are you transporting these things to the site? What do you have to put them in to keep them safe at safe temperature? How far do you have to travel to keep it cold or keep it warm? And these are all things that you want to think about with that. You go back to the document. Okay. So cooking and preparing things in advance. This is something that I like to do as much as possible. Some things, of course, are going to be best to prepare that day with that, but there are things that you can do in advance, and this will help with making sure that things are on time and to help relieve your stress as much as possible. Things like if you're doing sliced or cubed cheese, you can do that a couple days in advance and be able to store that in the fridge, or actually freeze them too, depending on things. With vegetables, carrots can be cut a day ahead 1 or 2 days ahead. Celery, generally, you're going to want to cut that day. You sometimes you can get away the day before, but the way that you would have to keep it fresh may not always be the best depending on how you're having to transport things. If you're on the site the night before and have a fridge to keep it in, then it's okay. But if you're trying to transport from anywhere, I would recommend celery being done the day of. But carrots can be done in advance. Same with cauliflower or broccoli. You can cut that up a day in advance and be able to put that in bags and be able to transport that. So there's other things like pasta. Pasta actually can be frozen. You can cook pasta to just cut it off about 2 minutes before you normally would cook it to. And you can put a little bit of olive oil in the bag and be able to freeze it. And then the day of the event, you just have to bring it to a boil and you only have to cook it for 2 minutes instead of having to cook it for the entire time. So if you're trying to batch cook a lot of pasta, that's something that can help with saving time. Same with things like meatballs. You can cook those ahead of time and be able to just reheat them, or you can at least form them and freeze them and have as much of that prep work that you're able to do ahead of time, do it. It's very helpful to be able to do that, especially if you're somebody like me, have a lot of health issues. I can't do a lot of on-site prep. I can't do a whole lot of things in one day. So if I know that I'm going to be responsible for the bulk of something, I will spread things out. Cakes freeze well. If you've got the freezer space, I've done where I have baked 8 cakes for an event and had them all in a separate freezer and ready to go just to take out. And that's not even something you have to take out a day ahead of time. If the site I'm often going to is 2 hours away. By the time I get there, or by the time we get to the end of the day of feast, the cake's already thawed out and you're ready to go. Same with cookies and brownies, cupcakes. These are things that are easy to bake ahead of time and freeze. And that takes a lot of load off of you when you're trying to get things done that day. So just some things to think about what you can do. All right, so this goes back to some things that I've touched on before. If others are bringing things, having a document showing you what everybody else is bringing, what they're responsible for. If I'm working with a team of people, I like to have a group chat going so that if there's anything that comes up, that we can talk about it. We can prepare for things. If somebody's being late to site, it's an easy way to communicate with everybody so everybody knows what's going on. And also helps with being able to share documents so everybody has access to the document that has all of the ingredients in it, so they know what all needs to be done that day. I will update things the day of and say, this is what tasks still need to be done. This is what needs to be done by this time. And then sometimes assign, this is who I need to do this. Now, sometimes that you won't know who's going to be doing what till you get there of things, but most of the time you can try to plan ahead and have an idea. And this will help things go more smoothly and help you to be on time. Okay, so these are just my random tips here at the bottom we're going to. Okay, so as I mentioned, I bring dish soap and hand soap, paper towels, new scrubbing sponges that have not been used before, latex-free dish gloves. I have a dish drainer that I use specifically for events. And so I transport that in a garbage bag. So in case, it's wet things, and because you never know what you're going to have necessarily. So I just like to have my own there with that. Also, I do maintain a little bit of stuff that is specifically has never touched gluten that I can use. I have a cutting board and knives and colander that have never had gluten in them. I keep them separate from everything. I wash them separate. I make sure that I clean out and sanitize the sink before they get washed so that I can keep those as separate things. I know that that is not possible for everybody to do that of things. I just try to do that as much as I can because a cutting board in particular, even if you wash it, stuff, because you're cutting into it, stuff can end up still being there, traces of it. So I do have one specifically for that. And so this is where the next thing of keeping a feast kit can help you if you do a lot of feast. I have a box that I keep a lot of things specifically for feast, my cooking equipment that I only use for feast. I did get rid of a lot because I didn't think I was doing feast anymore, but then I started doing feast again. So I started accumulating things. I also, is where I have my extra paper plates and bowls and everything, my gloves, my inflatable buffet. I have a crock pot that is only for feast, that is never touch gluten, so I can use it for gluten-free soups of things. I have my roaster oven I keep separate from the box because it's big, but that is a big thing. When I was doing a lot of feast, I actually used to have multiple roaster ovens. Um, so it depends on, how often you're cooking feast and how many people you're cooking for, what you want to keep around. But a crock pot's good. I've also started realizing that a Dutch oven is a really good thing to have also. I have an 8-quart enamel cast iron Dutch oven. It can be used on the stovetop. It can be used in the oven. And so one of my big things is being prepared. A lot of times something will go wrong that you can't plan ahead. So being prepared as much as you can. I always bring extra cooking devices. I like to make sure that I have extra things that can go in the oven, things that can be used on the stovetop, and things that can go in the microwave. I've had issues where the circuit breaker was blown and we couldn't use the roaster ovens anymore. So we had to scramble to try to use the ovens that we originally didn't think we were allowed to use, but we got permission to use. So because I had extra cooking pans on hand just in case, we were able to get them in the oven. Or my last event where the crock pot wasn't working the way that we thought it should, I was able to transfer it to the Dutch oven and get things cooked. I also have microwave cookers that we've had to use in the past to be able to use to get everything out on time. So, having the extra things on hand just in case is good. And don't forget these things that often people forget about. Make sure that you have hot pads and oven mitts, serving spoons, tongs, a can opener, mixing bowls, measuring cups, measuring spoons, knives, a peeler, ice, and a spatula. You will almost always need these things. Maybe you don't think you need these things, but something may come up at the last minute that, oh, you do need something. So it's good to have all of these things on hand. I recently found something that's very helpful for doing a lot of serving things. On Amazon, you can get a pack of 18 mini tongs that are stainless steel for about $7. And that is really helpful when you're doing buffet things or you have plates of food at the table for serving cheese and things like that. And since they're steel, they're not good. Stainless steel, they're not going to rust. They're not going to break like the little plastic ones. And so very cheap, easy, reusable thing for making sure that you have lots of serving utensils with that. And testing any new equipment in advance. I failed at this and did not realize with the crock pot. So now I know to make sure that this one is very, very touchy on making sure between the low and the high that it gets to the right place. And speaking of testing things, testing your recipes in advance is also a good idea. You want to be aware of how things work. If you're trying something new, with a piece that I have coming up, I'm going to be testing different ways on how I want to keep something warm because I'm not really sure the best way to do it with one of my items. So I'm going to test out a couple things ahead of time so that I can see how well they reheat. Do I need to reheat it in liquid? What do I need to do? How well do they keep warm? And so if you're not sure, you can usually find people that are willing to help you test the recipes. We like to do little test kitchens, have a little feast. Maybe you need to experiment with the seasonings a little bit. And that's one of the things I'm going to play around with. I'm doing a kofta or Middle Eastern meatballs, and there's a few different flavor profiles that I've seen for them, and I want to test them out. So I'm going to do a little test kitchen with that. And if you're in Amarillo, then come join me on that when I get to that point for things. Bring a permanent marker. You never know when you're going to need to mark things. I do like to label things when I put them in bags. If I'm cutting up things, I like to mark the bags to show what date that it was marked. This is good food safety things. Also, if you're doing things like having a bunch of dips and things that are going out to tables, if you have a marker to be able to write on the lid of the container before it goes out, then make sure that one table doesn't end up with 3 ranch dressings instead of a ranch dressing, a hummus, and a butter. You want to make sure that you have things labeled. And sometimes it's easy you may not think something can be mistaken for something, but sometimes when you're quickly trying to get food out, people don't always notice what things are. So it's good to have things labeled. Wagons are good. I have found that wagons are very helpful for loading and unloading. Also, sometimes if you need an extra place to store your containers of things to out of the way, it's helpful in moving around. My last one, we kept one of the containers that we had to get into a lot in the wagon so we can move it around easily to wherever it needed to go because it had so many different things in it. So these are just my general things. At the bottom, I do have some resources. I do have my email in there and my name on Facebook if you want to reach out to me. Also, this website, Ellen's Kitchen. This is very helpful. Specifically, the area for bringing out the big pots has many different menu ideas for cooking for large crowds, specifically some for designed for 50 or more and 100 or more. It will give you some menu ideas. It will break down ideas of how much you need of specific items. So it's really good for portions. I mean, even telling you how many cheese cubes you need for things and stuff like that. I really recommend that website. And there are other ones out there for portioning, how you want to do. I wasn't really planning on getting into that much, but if anyone wants to ask me questions, we can go over things. I know I have charts that I've had since I worked at summer camps, which is where I started cooking for large groups, that told me how much I needed to request of certain items when we were packing out for a cookout and things like that. So it's good to look at that. Now, a lot of times they'll say a quarter pound of meat. Okay, a quarter pound of meat does not always work for adults. We will say, the well knows that it's more like they need twice as much as that. That's also something to keep in mind when planning for the number of people. If I'm planning for 50 people, I want bare minimum 75 servings. I'm more comfortable with about 80 servings because some people will eat more, some people will eat less. I want to have extra food. I don't want to run out of food. And sometimes certain things, you look at whether you really need a whole lot more than others. Oftentimes on a main dish item, you may want to account for more servings than say a salad. You still want to at least 25 servings more than what you're planning for on everything, but I still might do a little bit more meat. For example, my last feast, we did 3 soups, and the 2 main ones, the potato soup and the beef soup, I wanted each of those to plan to have at least 60 servings of those 2. And then the vegan option that I did of doing 30 servings. And that we were aiming for serving about 75 people to 80 is what our goal was. So we had many more servings than what we needed, but also didn't necessarily need to make sure that the beef and the potato didn't need to have the full amounts for each, but a high amount, kind of close to things. But also knowing that the vegan option wasn't going to have as many people that wanted that, so I was able to lessen the servings of that. And some of that is also being aware of who you normally have coming. Sometimes you know that if it's your local group, you have a better idea of proportion wise of what you might expect than say if you're cooking for a group you've never cooked for. I'm about to be cooking for a very large Barony event for FSCA. I'm a little familiar with some things. As I said, I was able to plan my menu based off of certain things with that. And I'm going to try to see if I can get to that menu to show you some examples of things. Okay. To show you some of the things that I do for planning. Now, this menu is still, I haven't gotten into some specifics. It's still narrowing down my seasonings and things like that. But this gives you an idea of how I start to plan things out and how I'm doing the menus. Is that I like to have a variety of things. And this one I specifically needed to make sure to accommodate for no pork. That is actually a very common allergy that you do want to keep in mind. To, if you do have pork, to also have something that doesn't have pork that is a protein. So we're doing Mediterranean base for this one. So I have olives and feta, salad with a lemon herb dressing, cucumbers, carrots, hummus, pita chips, grapes, and then we'll have a chickpea soup, which is vegan and gluten-free, and the ground meat meatballs. We'll have pitas with it and a yogurt-based sauce. And then for dessert, still working out some things on that, some options of my gluten-free option that I'm looking at is most likely going to be the spiced oranges with raisins. And the harissa also has many different names. It's a type of semolina cake that's soaked in a sweet syrup. Oftentimes it's topped with almonds. I may leave the almonds off because of nut concerns, or have one available that has almonds and one that doesn't, for trying to take into consideration of things. But with this meal, it gives a variety of choices, which is one of the things I was trying to stress earlier, is to have a lot of different things. So say somebody can't eat the soup, they still have other protein options in there that they can try to make up and eat with it. As I have between the chickpeas, the chickpea soup, the hummus, the cheese, and the meatballs, I have 4 different proteins in there, and to accommodate a lot of different options to get people. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, stop the share, and then we'll get to some questions here. So I know people like to ask questions off of the recording.